Hi, I wanted to teach you a little bit about layout design, little tips and tidbits to help you make your presentations more professional looking, more tight. So here I have open slides from Google, and they have lots of templates that you can work from, and I just want to point out some of the template qualities. So looking at this, we've got text in a box, and this is something I've seen some of you do. You have text in a box, but one thing you want to make sure that you do it well is that you don't have your text too close to the edge of the box. So make sure there's enough space. This is a nice comfortable space on either side. Um, and then there's a balance out between the larger heading and then a small subheading. And they play against each other by having two distinct categories of text here. We've got sans serif without the little feet and serif. So you can pretty easily mix one from sans serif and one serif face without having them clash together. It really becomes a challenge when you try to mix two of the same category. So this looks nice and there's enough space around the border as well. Let's look at this image here. They've used a sans serif and it can be pretty simple and plain, but it's got this vibrant color, so it makes it work. If this were just a black background, it might look a little dull, but you could do something by putting a little white line around a little border, or you can change it to a typeface that has a little more personality. So the serif typeface that they were using, you notice how it's got these very thins on it, on the F and the E there. That can make it harder to read. It can make it thin out and not be as legible. This is digital, and you can pretty much control the image that people are looking at if they're looking at it on their screen. But if you print out, it could fill in, and actually if you're digital too, if somebody's looking at it on a phone, it could end up becoming too small and not show up. So I don't love this font. It looks pretty and has a nice feel to it. It's got these nice big rounds in the serif there. So that's sort of fun, but is that always appropriate too? It feels a little bit elegant and not like a glamour magazine and not necessarily fun and durable. So you have to get a sense for the personality of the fonts, and it should represent the personality of the piece the presentation that you're doing. Okay, so looking at some more details here, we've got lists of text. So one thing I want to point out, these bullet points, they all have an even amount of space between each line. And sometimes it helps to group, when you've got multiple lines of one bullet point, you want to tighten up the space in between them. So if I go up into this section, you can delete or add space. So and depending on what's already been selected, so we can add space after the list, and then I'll add a little space here after this list. And so now it's grouping it together a little bit. You see the extra space there. Now I can go back in here, and through here I can also make it single space, so it's tightened up the space in between the lines within a paragraph. So that looks a little tighter. So if you're going to have a lot of bullet points with multiple lines of text for each one, it's better to go and manipulate that. Up here where we've got just one item on each line, it's not such an issue. Little things like the bullet. So we've got this bullet here is kind of big and gray. Another thing I like to use is if you use a shift and you hit the little divider line, I think that's a little cleaner. I also like it in this particular layout. There's a little white line here. There's no need for it, but it just makes it a little more graphic. And so we can go and add a graphic line here and make it pink, and it sort of ties it in a little bit more. I didn't like that big gray bullet. So another thing I want to show you is this page has lots of images, and you're going to have very often lots of images, and so they've got them all aligned so that they're making an even box fill up the space. So they're doing that by having extra blank space in the image, which you may or may not want to have. So let's say we're going to crop these images in more. So if you click on an image, you get the crop tool here, so we can move this in, and say I go and I click on this one and I crop this down here a bit. Whoops. Crop this onion here. Make it that much. And maybe I'm going to make this one a bit smaller. I don't want it to be that dominant, so I can shrink that up. So now I look at this and I feel there's this extra white space here and white space here, but it feels a little heavier on this side. So I'm going to grab all of these, and when I drag it, that red line shows up for the middle, and then if I keep, there's the, so it's centered in the space now. Now we know it's centered because those lines, but we want to eyeball it too. Now this still doesn't feel evenly weighted to me. This, and sometimes it's hard to articulate, but one thing is I feel like these two lines aligning here with nothing else lining so much, I might want to pull this up, and notice that red line comes up there. Whoops, I accidentally stretched it. I want to click it and crop it. You want to make sure you don't accidentally distort the image. Okay, so if I do that, it's got this nice line here. It's making this break that horizontal line, so sometimes that's a nice aspect. And maybe I want to pull this up a little bit, and the reason why it feels a little dinky, if I also look at this space here, I think I might want this to take up that same relative space. And this is sort of like when we talk about color, some of it is intuitive and some of it we're really being analytical about it. So to me, when I saw this space not right, it was intuitive, but when I start to compare it to different things, it's probably because it's not imbalanced spatially. And the same thing, we have that discussion with color. So I do like this, but I might actually want to bring these down a little bit to let this stand out, breaking the border on both sides. So that's one different take that you can have for working with images like that. So here's another image on this template. This is fine and nice. Here we've got smaller text. So this text is 14 points. Generally for a presentation, that's the smallest you want to do. A lot of the presentations I give to you folks, actually, I go down to about 13, not more than less than 12 points. And again, this text font here has these awfully thins here, so you can go in and play with different fonts and try something that looks a little bit less tiny. This Meriwether actually looks kind of nice. Actually, when I look at it bigger, it looks a little bit stark and not as elegant, so I want something to look elegant. So when you see something small, it changes the way it feels, but Garamond is generally a very nice font, and I could actually make this, seeing the Garamond versus that other font, I feel like the Garamond needs to be larger than that other font did. See the weight of this compared to the weight of these headings. I might want to not make these headings bold, or maybe I would make them smaller in comparison to this text here, or maybe I'll go and instead of having it be this weight, I'll make the Garamond bigger. Sometimes it becomes a little too thick, but you got to get the balance between the major headings and the subheadings, so you play with the nuances of that. So this is a slide that's preset. I'm going to show you creating your own. So one of the things I've done is I just pulled some images of Cuba because nobody was doing Cuba. And I haven't done research. I just pulled a bunch of images with different color and came up with throwing some ideas out. So I'm thinking this red seemed like it was about fertility, so I started to put some text in here. I have grabbed some Lorem Ipsum, so I'm just going to put some fake text in here for design. So here I've got a paragraph copy, I've got a title for red, and I've got some images here. So I would like this to be a little more decorative and not be using a sans serif font. So I'm going to go in here and look at what I've got. I think I may use Georgia. It feels a little academic to me because the spacing between the text is nice and clean. It's got the serifs, they're pointy serifs. I like that. This right now is what we call justified. So what I'm seeing is it's nice and squared off on the edges, but I find that the space in between each one of these words is too big compared to the tightness of the letters between each word. So I'm going to go in and change it from being justified to being flush left. And when I look at that, it looks much more even to me now. Let me do Command C so you can see. So look at the spacing, those wide spacing compared to the text here. And then when I go in and I change it to flush left, ragged right, I feel like it looks a little more even, and I like that. So, and then I want to play with the red, so I could go and use a sans serif for this, so maybe I will actually stay with Lotto, and I'll make it bolder, and I'll make it bigger. I may decide that I want to actually make it all caps, so let me look at this in all caps too. That's kind of nice. If you add all caps, you generally want to add more space between the letters. So I don't know if we have the option within here. So sometimes I will actually go and just add extra space on my own. So, or I might decide not to use all caps, but let's use this for now. So one of the things you might want to be doing is playing with adding some of that color that you're talking about in the layout. So let me try putting in a box here. Where's the box tool? Oh, right here, sorry. Shapes. So I'm going to grab a shape here and say I want red behind the whole background. I'm going to fill it with that's not fill, that is, isn't it? Paint bucket, sorry, paint bucket over here. So I'm going to fill it with this red. Ooh, that looks really strong on the screen. That looks kind of pink. That looks kind of orange, but I kind of like that. I think that could work. So I am going to arrange and send this to the back. So if I'm doing that, one of the things I'm going to want to do is be consistent for each one of my colors. So that means, do I want the red to be white, right? And then this text here, I want to, it's transparent background, and do I want this text to be white as well? So that works on this red. So if you pick a blue and a pink and all these other colors, you're going to want to make sure that you're picking a blue that's dark enough and a pink that's dark enough. It could be challenging with yellow. So you have to have forethought in thinking about this. So this is one approach. Let me make a duplicate slide. Sometimes I like to do that and try out different approaches. So maybe what I'm going to do is keep red in the background, but then I will make all of my text a gray color. It's a little softer then. And then maybe I make the word will end up being this in the color. So, and then maybe I play with, since I've got it all caps, it doesn't have descenders, maybe I play with having the text sit right on the line there. So maybe I'll make, so I'm playing with all these different things, but I'm thinking about how it's going to work with all of the different things that I'm working with. Now, the other thing is I'm going to align things consistently. So I'm going to make this image here a bit smaller, and I still want to have that visual alignment here. That might be too close to the end. One thing that happens when you're using slides, especially in PowerPoint, sometimes the borders change. Slides is actually stronger, works better than PowerPoint. It's less fussy. So, and I like the idea of breaking this line here. This text, I haven't totally resolved what I want to do with this text, but I think perhaps I want this text to end up being in a white area. And so I will make another white box here. Shapes. And make this white. And so then that can end up being my text box. Whoops. And arrange, bring to front. Okay, so, and what size do I have this text here? So it's 10.5. So you know what? I was saying a moment ago that I wouldn't want it to be less than 15, but this type looks perfectly fine to me at 15, to be honest. So I will leave that. I've got a border on here accidentally, so right here. This should be transparent. Okay. So now I've been playing with these images. So how do I want these to end up being? This one actually feels really large. It doesn't make sense to me to have one be so large. So I think they all should be a little bit more relative to each other. And I've created an awkward space with this box. So maybe I will bring this down. So I'm working out my template while I'm doing this, and then whatever I decide on, I will experiment with it with another layout, another color, and see if I feel like it's working. I might make some more adjustments. Sometimes I can have it be a little bit variable, but I still want it to be pretty consistent. So now, one thing that I don't want to see you do, and people do this very often, let me jump to another slide for a minute, is I've got all these images and they start to make them kind of overlap. So we've got one here and one here, and maybe I don't need this many actually, so let me get rid of this monument here. So what I was saying with white is that it seems to be about government, you know, very much the government buildings, strong comments, and then this is not government, it's all religious building. So, but see, sometimes you'll take some images and you'll let them just overlap a little. And this design right here, the way it is now, it's weak. It's got these uneven spaces. So if you do what I was doing with that image from that slide that was set in the template, you know, I can go and by putting, this one should be bigger, smaller because the type is bigger, so I can move this over here. So if I have a collection of images, I want to make them all have even space between them and fill in this way. So now looking at what I did with this page and look at what I did with this page, well, these things work. So if I grab this, these elements here, saying that, and that, if I copy and go here and add these elements, first of all, I've picked a white, which isn't going to work, so let me just fudge this for a moment. Let me make it a gray. No, that's not going to work. I guess I should have just, let's pretend I used a different color. Let's make this blue, and I'll make this be P-L-U-E, and I'm going to copy this blue and use the same. I don't remember what blue I used. That was Okay, so I'm going to send this to the back. Okay, so now these pictures are taking up a lot more space, so do I want to edit out the number of pictures that I've put here? And maybe what I do, actually this worked pretty well. This text is pretty much fitting here, and all I really have to do, this is not proving well as a, it's proving I guess that this layout was working, but it's not adjusting and making it too difficult. It's not too challenging, but I'm going and cropping the images a little bit so that I have more room for that text in here. So, and then I would go and put that white box of text there again. So I could also break this margin here if I wanted to. Bring this up here a little bit. To play with breaking that. I didn't break it here, but I might decide, oh, you know what? It works to break it, so I would consistently break that. So that is one approach, putting this color like here. Let me try something different where instead of putting a background color, maybe what I do is I just put a strip of color down the side so that it adds a little bit of color to the page, but it doesn't end up constraining what I'm doing. So I can go in there and fill this with green, and then I don't have a situation where, oh, I can't put it on white, but I'm just adding a little bit of color. So then I'll move this to the back. And so some of these pictures can overlap that. So I tend to like letting the images not have to be so constrained and fit into a rigid format, all interconnected, so that I can play with them and let them move around and not have to crop them. And so let me grab a little bit of text here. So I'm going to grab this text and put it here. And so this can fit in with this grouping. And then if I took these, I didn't put a color heading here. So let me take text and say green. And do I want to make it green? Probably. That's not what I meant to do, sorry. And it needs to be bigger. And I think I want it to be fancier. And so I don't want this word green to get lost in here. So maybe what I do is I pull these down, and maybe this green line ends, and it allows me to make the word green bigger and sit up here separate from it. Or maybe I go and I pull this green bar and I put it over here, and my text ends up falling in between here. So this actually, now that I've sort of thrown this together, this seems like a much more fluid layout scheme that could work really well, because on some of them I could have this text I could go and take the text, the box, and this, copy them, and let me mix it with this gold here for a moment. So if I go and make this gold, and because this one is quite a bit different, and we make this also green, but it says gold. I got that text. So now what I'm doing is this gold bar perhaps could end up being the same thickness, but I change it so it goes at the bottom sometimes. It's got an outline around it, which it shouldn't, so make sure you don't have outlines around something when you don't really want them to be. Transparent line. Okay, so so then I can play with the text. Maybe the text ends up being over here and this bar is here, and basically what I'm doing is I'm working with these same three elements. I am arranging order, bring send it back, this to go back. So I've got a box of text, a line, and the word, and so maybe the word always ends up, the color word ends up in the top corner, but this box can move around and it can go behind something like this, not behind this white box. It's not working that way. But so I've got these same elements, and this text box keeps the relative same shape. So this can become more of a fluid layout, but these elements 1, 2, 3 remain the same. 1, 1, 2, 3, versus something like this where it's a little bit more constrained. And then so playing with your images so that they are all giving you just the same amount of space in between each one. So that gives you hopefully some parameters to look at, but